Hi friends, Andrew Carruthers, Education Director for Sam Villa. Today we're going to tackle something we see becoming quite the trend out there, and that's invisible layers. We've even heard the term coined of ghost layers. And what is the guest looking for when they ask for these kinds of things? Well, they're looking for the benefit of layers, which is fullness and texture and movement and body, but what they don't want to see is they don't want to actually see layers. So we're going to work in a really orderly process that can be used on fine hair, medium hair, thick hair, whoever sits in your chair. But if they're looking for movement, texture, fullness, all those things, but don't want surface visible layers, we've got a technique that I think you're going to really enjoy. So let's get after it. When working with a technique like this, which is pretty much mainly just texturizing types of techniques, it's still really important to work in a structured fashion. One of the things that can happen with a technique like this is, especially if you go over the same section too many times, you could end up leaving some really big weak spots or even holes within your haircut. So we want to address this in a way that has the same type of intent and purpose behind it as we would any other haircut. So we're going to part off first the back area of the hair that has all of the density to it. So we're going to part just forward of what we call the horizontal transition, where the head starts to change and round. But what we're really looking for with this parting is that we want to see where the hair density changes. So you can see right there, right where the hairline on Lydia pops up, that's where the density is going to change on her hair. So we'll start by taking vertical sections straight up from that hairline to just, again, mark off where the density changes. Then we are going to take a horizontal section across the head. Now, the size of this section depends on a few things. We would suggest that for finer hair or medium hair, the sections are slightly larger. For thicker hair, that the sections are slightly thinner. Now, with finer hair or medium hair, we're looking to do this technique to not only create separation, but we would also really like to create some inflation, some volume, some fullness. So our technique is going to be underneath, up, and out. So if you think about the principle of short hair and long hair, short hair tends to be more structurally rigid than long hair. So when we take hair and we create short to long, whichever direction that short to long goes, that's the way the hair is going to be influenced to move. So if I take a vertical section, which we are going to do, and we cut from the bottom first and work short to long this way, that is going to influence the hair to want to expand outward. So what type of hair textures do you think that that's going to be best for? Fine to medium hair. For thicker hair textures, we're going to want to do the opposite, and we're going to want to do smaller sections because we're going to want to make more small holes within the hair from the top down. Because what we don't want to do is on thick hair is we don't want to create some points in here that have a lot of short hair. Because even if we're working short to long from the top down, we could create an area of so much density of short hair that it creates expansion within that thicker hair. The goal with this type of cutting within thicker hair types, we would be taking smaller sections, work from top to bottom, and taking less hair out on each section. With medium to fine hair, we're going to be doing kind of the exact opposite. We want to be a little bit more deliberate with this hair texture because what we do want to create is some strength of short hair sitting underneath this long hair so that it gives it something to support. Now, this isn't magic potion kind of stuff. This isn't just automatically going to take fine hair and inflate it into something really full and big. And especially if the fine hair has less density to it, it's actually kind of on the thinner side, then we want to be really cautious with this technique because you get too aggressive and you're going to leave the ends looking super skinny and wispy, and that's not good either. So Lydia here has a pretty much medium hair texture. She's got a good density. We're taking, I would call that about 1.5 inches thick section. We're going to introduce the shear. This is the Artist Series slide cutting shear. It's particularly good for these kind of techniques where we're going to be moving as we cut. We're going to introduce the shear underneath, and we want to kind of look for that natural bend in the hair. If we blouse the hair, we'll see a natural bend. And as long as we stay on the outside edge of that natural bend, we shouldn't create sproutiness, because that kind of shows us where the hair softens to its own weight. So we'll give it a little blouse, we see right there. So that's where we'll enter. And the technique is working short to long. And I'm using a little bit of tension on the hair and a little bit of pressure with that shear. Again, because the slide cutting shear is so forgiving, it's incredibly soft, and it's actually intended to naturally push the hair. So we want to work structurally because we want to leave that piece alone. And now take the next section. We're working in about a 1-inch section. And then again, find that bend. We want to start around the same place, relatively the same place on each strand, but it's okay, and it's actually somewhat beneficial if it isn't perfectly the same spot on every single section. Now, if it's 2 sections out here and then 1 section there, that is going to look a little odd. It's going to create some imbalance within the shape. So try to be somewhat consistent, but also be okay with the fact that it's going to be somewhat inconsistent because it's beneficial. So many of you are probably thinking, well, I don't have a slide cutting shear, so how do I do this? So I'll find that gap. On the next section, I'll grab a different shear, more of a normal cutting shear, and I'll show you how to do this with a regular shear. Even with the slide cutting shear, because again, it is a very soft shear and it's meant specifically to allow the hair to push, you can see that it has this natural curvature to the blade. Even with this, we want to not just close the blade because it's going to catch hair, fold hair, potentially cut too much hair off. So we're just kind of talking the shear through the hair, a loose opening and closing as we move up the strand. All right, so let's take our next section. We want to be consistent with the size of these sections. So we'll take that about 1.5 inches that we have there. We're going to just continue working up the head through the back area, which is the densest area. And it's dense for a couple reasons, not just because there's a lower hairline, but just even from an aspect of thinning. The donut area kind of through here is naturally predisposed to not thin. And I did forget one thing. Before you drop that section down, luckily I can see right where I stopped. Before you take that section down, take another clip and put it on top of the section that you just cut. Because what that does is helps you to know where not to cut. You see how organized we're working. This is something that, we've seen a lot of just kind of take the section and create some short to long from inside out. Nothing wrong with that, but if you do that throughout the entire head, it's going to be difficult to be consistent, and you're going to have areas that are still kind of thicker and thinner. This is going to give you the ability to be a little bit more consistent. So I'm going to grab a little shear. This is just the 5.5 inch streamline shear. This is probably the shortest blade in our arsenal. Well, I guess we do have the swivel shear too, the 5.5 swivel. But just to show you that you can do this with this pretty much any shear, because typically we would like to do this with a slightly longer blade, but what's great about this technique is you could really do it with any shear. Now the main difference is with this shear, let's blouse, we can see that curvature, we want to be about there. The main difference is when I go to close, this is going to cut some hair. So I need to be incredibly gentle with the touch. So with the slide cutting shear, we put lots of tension and even a little bit of pressure onto the hair as we were cutting. With a regular shear, that is meant to grab a hold of the hair and cut cleanly. Take another 1-inch section. Let that blouse. With this type of shear, we want to be really, really cautious and careful. And you'll notice I'm almost kind of just like softly stroking it down the hair strand so that it just really is kind of peeling some pieces out of that. Next section. I'm getting about 4 sections across the back. Of course, that's going to depend on the size of their head. And also notice that the shear is not coming in real perpendicular to the hair strand. I'm trying to get it real parallel to the hair strand, again, because that's going to remove less hair. Blouse that out, find my entry point. Just real gently peeling that hair away as we move down the section. Now again, the purpose of this is to create those shorter bits moving to longer bits from the underneath out to support some more fullness to the hair. If we were doing this to deflate the hair, to actually remove the weight and to get it to hopefully collapse a little bit, we would work from the top down. All right, before we go to the next section, let's take this bottom clip out. Before we go anywhere, let's just kind of tickle the hair a little bit and see how we're feeling, seeing if we're getting the movement and texture that we want, and that's looking actually quite nice. What we want is we don't want to see the ends get thin, because people aren't looking for thin, wispy ends, they're just looking for that separation and texture. So if you do the first section and you're noticing that section looked a little thin and wispy to it, on the next section, increase the thickness and increase the width of that section so that as you drop that down, it'll add some weight back into that perimeter. So I'm gonna work in the exact same technique through the next 2 sections going through the crown here. Okay, as we get up into the crown, one little cautionary point, be cautious of growth patterns, because if they have a really strong sprouty point throughout the crown, a really strong growth pattern, by putting too much short hair there, you can add strength into that growth pattern. So as you let the hair fall down, take notice to how it wants to fall. This piece is fantastic. There's nothing I have to be concerned about, so we'll let it blouse a bit. And again, just gently peel that hair from short to long out to the ends. Being careful to make sure that you're leaving those ends fully intact there, because that's what this particular guest is asking for. They don't really want to see a lot of surface layering, they just want to see the movement and body of layering. Now, here we are getting into an area that even on the mannequin head, they implant a swirl to make it more realistic, which is awesome. Thank you, Pivot Point, for doing that. With that, we again want to take the hair, give it a little blouse and see where it bends. You can kind of see that even this, it's sort of giving me a blouse further out here, which is great because that's hopefully what the hair will show you. But if you're concerned at all, you can start out a little bit further, because that little bit of extra weight that you're going to leave by starting out further will minimize the risk of that growth pattern taking over and wreaking some havoc. You can always do a little bit more. Remember that principle. You can always take more hair off. But if we get a little crazy and make a big fat hole there, that's something that's not super fixable. So we can see we get this really nice soft texture. Now when they kind of tickle the hair a little bit, the great thing is some of those shorter pieces that we cut on that upper surface, they are going to pop through a little bit. So it's going to give some movement through here. It's not going to look one length, but it's going to start to give them some body and texture and some fullness. As we step onto the sides, here's a couple little warning areas. We'll go back into the same size section. And when we do that, go ahead and take the clip and clip all that back hair out of the way for the same reason. We want to make sure we protect that hair that we've already previously cut so that we don't cut it twice. One thing that I did forget to mention in the back hairline that I'll mention here, be a little bit cautious, because if you have guests that they pull their hair up into high buns really often, you want to be a little bit cautious with this, because if they do that really often and you cut a bunch of short hair underneath, when they pull that up, that short hair is going to fall down. If they pull more of a low ponytail just for workouts and stuff, this isn't a big deal. But if they do the high bun, high ponytail, something like that, you may want to start maybe about, I don't know, a half an inch or so up on the head shape so that you leave some hair on the perimeter that when they pull that up, it'll help to mask those shorter hairs. So we're going to just continue as if she does not do that, because we've already started that way. This section over top of the ear, nothing special. If they do have some growth patterns, which do sometimes happen here around the ear, you might want to be a little bit cautious. And even just the density around here can also start to thin out a bit. And if that happens, we also want to be a little cautious on how much we remove right there at the perimeter. On the front hairline, we definitely want to be a little cautious, because again, if she's someone that pulls her hair back away from her face, she pulls it back into a ponytail, if we get kind of a chunk of shorter hair right here on the face, that could be problematic for her. So one way that you could do this is you could work slightly diagonal from the ear forward. So you're still producing some shorter hair on the interior, but you're keeping it kind of behind that front hairline. So that was a little short, hang on. Get the blouse, there's the end of my blouse. So I'll work just really soft from the ear, and almost like I'm over directing forward and working short to long towards her face now. So that way we're still getting some shorter hair under there to give it some texture and movement, but from the front, she's not going to see any short pieces around that front hairline. So I'm going to continue working up this side, and then the exact same thing as we step off to her opposite side. We're going to work in the exact same movement, same sections, elevations about 90 degrees horizontal to the floor. That's going to be a good elevation because it's going to keep things very, very soft. If you do happen to make a little bit of an aggressive cut or something, by the time it falls back down in natural fall, it's going to soften out. If you do this at super low elevation, a chunk like that could be really visible. So I'm going to continue on. As we get into the last section here on the top, again, same thing as we were talking about in the crown, just be a little bit cautious here. If you get too aggressive at this point, you could potentially leave her with some chunks of hair that are strong enough that they could pop through that surface and cause some kind of kickouts. So on top here, give it a little blouse. Right there is that entry point. Think about, I don't know, right there underneath. That actually should be okay because that shorter piece would be just falling kind of in the roundness of the head. If my last section was up here further, that might be a little scarier to do something like that and not have it show through. So if you're worried, just go ahead and follow your fingers out a little bit farther before you start the motion of the shear. And that's going to give you some protection. Remember guys, you can always cut more hair off. Great rule of thumb to just constantly remind yourself of. Just give that a little blouse, find where that wants to start, It is important to work from their natural part on this. Hopefully, they usually stay with a similar part, because if they're going to flip the part back and forth, the only thing you have to be a little careful of is making sure that, so for example, right now, we're cutting that shortest hair right here. So let's say she says, well, I flip my part back and forth. You know, sometimes I'll grab it from over here and flip it to the other side. That would make this shortest point sit right on the surface. And because it's going further over to the opposite side of the head, that's really gonna appear as a very, very short point. If your guest has that particular need where they want to flip it back and forth, we would suggest to make sure you're not placing those shortest hairs anywhere above that vertical transition or the round of the head. That's gonna protect you. Then through the top, maybe just more kind of like really soft texturizing instead of being so deliberate. All right, last section here. And again, this is something we don't wanna risk getting too much short hair right around her face. So we'll work from kind of behind this section, move forward, and we're starting a little bit longer, let that fall. So that way those shorter bits from the inside just aren't right along the perimeter. Go ahead and take all of your clips out at this point. Comb through the hair, make sure that all the loose hairs have fallen out. Give it a little shake and a feel. Sam says that texturizing is all eyes and feel. And that's so true. One of the things we want to make sure we do is as we're working, you know, maybe you can close your eyes, really tune into your hands, make sure you're not feeling any thick areas or density. But the mirror is such a great tool at this point, you know, really looking in the mirror with the guest and have them put their hands through it, see how they're feeling, where do they feel like there's too much density still. This is actually feeling pretty darn good. But you can see why it's so important to work in a structured manner and to do this with intent and purpose. If we just kind of took random sections and just kind of jabbed at it, we would risk having thin area here, thick area here, maybe a super big hole right around the ear. There's a lot of problems that could come up. So last thing, let's get a little product in her hair. Let's go really simple this time. Let's go Shine Flash 02. It's just enough of a product that it's going to help to show off some of that texture. We're gonna get the hair moving with the hands, and then Shine Flash gets introduced from pretty far back away from the hair. We don't wanna get too close with product. We want it to distribute evenly and softly through the hair. And really mainly, we want that product to distribute through the ends of the hair more so than through kind of like the scalp and mid-strand. Most of the time, product that we're looking to add visual texture, we're gonna wanna keep that mids and ends. All right, so let's review the key points here. First, we wanna divide off that area that is got a ton more hair back here behind the hairline from the front. Start with about 1.5 inch section across the back, that horizontal section. If it's finer hair, you can use a wider section so you leave a little bit more density per section. If it's thicker hair, go ahead and skinny up those sections so that you can create more holes within the hair, but kind of smaller pieces. And also remember, if you're working with thicker hair that you're trying to deflate, work from the top of the section down rather from the underneath section up. Then continue those 1.5 inch sections. Remember, when you get up to the crown area, be very careful of those swirls over top of the ear and across the back hairline. Be cautious if the guest is someone that wants to pull their hair up into high ponytails, high buns. Make sure you leave them a little bit of a masking piece just right at the hairline, so when they pull that up, it collects those shorter hairs into that bun or ponytail. Also around the front hairline, work from behind the section towards the face so that you're not putting shorter hairs right there next to the face. Hopefully this is something you can introduce to your clients that are looking for more fullness, texture, and movement, but they don't want to actually see surface layers in their haircut. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them. We'd love to hear from you guys. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Andrew Carruthers, Education Director for Sam Villa.